Greetings, Internet! With this month being the 25th anniversary of Goosebumps, I thought that I would make a video about it. So I'm going to take the 62 books of the original Goosebumps series, and I'm going to rank them from the worst all the way up to the best. Make sure to keep in mind, this is only my opinion. You might have a completely different opinion than me, and that's fine. But according to me, these are the worst and then the best of the original 62 Goosebumps books. So I'm going to jump right in. Starting with my least favorite Goosebumps book in the original series and probably of all time, we have Monster Blood 3. Real briefly, it's Evan and his friend Andy again. They're babysitting Evan's little cousin Kermit, and he keeps on messing with them. I don't really know. He's just a jerk. And so then they decide, hey, let's really show him. Let's use the monster blood. You know, that's like 20 chapters later when they say, okay, we're going to use the monster blood. And they really don't have a plan to combat it or anything. And then Evan accidentally ends up eating some because of a fiasco that happens down in the basement. And then for the last chapters of the book, it's just Evan growing. And they got to find a way to get him back down to size. That's really it. That is like the whole story. This book has almost nothing. To put it bluntly, this book sucked. It was boring, utterly lacking any kind of interesting events. It was plotless, having no sensible structure whatsoever, pointless, pathetically predictable, slow beyond belief, dreadfully rehashed, much too far-fetched to suspend one's disbelief for. It had detestable characters with terribly unnatural dialogue, and there is very little, if any at all, very little suspense or scariness to it. This book is easily the worst. If you ever want to waste a few hours of your life, hours that you know you'll never get back, then just pick up a copy of this book and start reading. For me personally, I want to get an extra copy of this book so I can keep it in my bathroom, tear away the pages one by one, wipe my rear with it, and then flush it down the toilet with the other crap. Seriously, nothing redeems this book. The fact that Kermit was such a genius when he was so young, and he was actually able to make those potions, including the shrinking potion, which, you know, even today I don't think we have. It was just unbelievable. And I don't mean unbelievable as in, like, remarkably good. I mean, it was impossible to believe. And then there was a time where he spent, like, 3 actual chapters trying to get the mix right so that he could fix everything. It was boring, and it just slowed down this snail of a book even more. Furthermore, it was painfully obvious that the shrinking potion was going to end up fixing everything in the end. It was so obvious, I didn't think that Stine was going to go that route. I thought that he would, you know, like, they try the shrinking potion, and it doesn't do anything, and so then Stine would have to kind of go into the creative channels of his mind and find a different way. But no, that would at least make the book somewhat interesting. The twist ending, again, is so predictable and so uninteresting. This book is really not that great. Okay, coming up next is Welcome to Camp Nightmare. The story's about this kid, Billy. He goes to camp, and then all sorts of strange things start to happen. Campers start disappearing, and starts hearing sounds, and nobody is willing to help him. The counselors are not willing to help him. Uncle Al is not willing to help him. And as more and more campers are disappearing, Billy is getting more and more frustrated that he can't get any answers. And then the ending ruins everything. Because it turns out they're not even on Earth. They're off on, I guess, some other planet. And the whole book is basically the government trying to test how ethical Billy is. That's it. That's the twist. I hate this book so much, mostly for one reason: the ending. This book answers the age old question of, can the ending to a book ruin the entire book? And the answer is a resounding yes. This book's ending is so monumentally egregious that the entire book is ruined by it. Not only in my opinion, but in the story itself. The ending makes this entire book one big fake out scare, resulting in a pointless book for the reader and for the characters. The book did have a little bit of subtle foreshadowing, I guess, to ease into the twist ending, but in the context of the book, it just came off as confusing and weird. Also, while reading this book, I just found myself getting really frustrated at all of the characters, particularly the counselors, and not in a good way. I'm sure that Stein was trying to convey some feelings of frustration for the reader to kind of get into Billy's shoes a little bit, but I didn't feel frustration out of sympathy for Billy. I just felt frustration because I was reading the book. And apart from all that, this book was kind of uninteresting. Admittedly, it did have quite a few good points to it, and a lot of moments of true scariness. Like, for example, when a camper is said to have been torn to pieces by the monster in the camp. But that just makes the ending all the more insulting. I can't stand the ending to this book. It ruins everything. And again, it results in really a very stupid, pointless book. Up next is The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. Well, let me tell you, the curse isn't real. The title and the cover of this book are really quite misleading. As it turns out, there isn't really a curse. It's just a guy who takes it upon himself to protect the tomb. There isn't even a lot of time spent in the tomb, so there's not really that much of the mummy's tomb. And the biggest problem of all, there are no mummies until the very end, and only for a few sentences. Gabe and Sari with their Uncle Ben. He's an archaeologist, and he finds this tomb. There's one guy, Ahmed, who's in his group that's really kind of freaking out, and it just results in all sorts of shenanigans. It just results in a mess of nothing. The kids eventually get kidnapped and then taken back down to the mummy's tomb, where Ahmed threatens to mummify them. Then the mummies come in, save the day, and then that's it. That's the last that we see of the mummies. And then, they all live happily ever after or whatever. The climax of this book is only a little thrilling, only a little bit, and it does nothing to help the book in a big way. I suppose it could be interesting because there are some moments that might be scary to some people. For example, when Gabe and Sari get kidnapped by Ahmed, the man who is protecting the tomb, and he threatens to mummify them and all that. Yeah, that could be scary, but the book overall is so boring up until that point that it's really hard to enjoy. And when the mummies finally do come in, they're only there for maybe a paragraph, maybe two. I gotta say, I was expecting so much more from this book, because I really enjoy mummy stories, and I was expecting a good mummy story from this book. And this book let me down big time. I also found a website that I've linked down below that ranked this book very high. And so, again, I had high hopes for it, but nothing. Coming up next, we have Legend of the Lost Legend. I gotta say, this book really beat itself to death. There was somewhat of an interesting premise. There's Justin and Marissa who go with their dad on an adventure to look for this lost legend, which is some ancient manuscript that they really need to read because no one has ever found it, no one's ever read it before. But the synopsis on the back of the book is not really true at all. The terrifying Vikings from long ago is one character in the book. And honestly, that Viking tries to help them by pointing them in the right direction. So there's nothing really terrifying about it. The dog also is trying to help them. It's the Viking's dog who leads Justin and Marissa to the Viking, who then in turn leads them to find the lost legend. And the Hundred of Squealing Mice was just lame. This book failed miserably in the middle because almost every single chapter was a fake out scare. Every time that they were looking at, oh my gosh, there's something to get us. Oh wait, it's fake. It was so frustrating to read this book. It was so frustrating to try to sit through all of those fake out scares. It's like, just give us some real horror already. The only reason that this book is ranked this high is because of the ending. The twist ending is very poignant and honestly, it's kind of dark. So the Clarks, which is the name of the protagonist, the Clarks, they're going after the lost legend. The two children are. And then they kind of go on this quest in which they come across so many fake out scares, it's stupid. And then they eventually pass all those trials, I guess. And then they meet up with their dad and they find the lost legend. But the lost legend is a cursed manuscript, so whoever owns it is lost forever. And so you realize, now they are lost. Now they have to wait until somebody comes to take it from them. That twist ending, even as poignant and dark as it is, it does so little to make up for the rest of the book. It did very little to help the repetitive and rather stupid fake outs through the entire story that took place nearly every chapter. Next up is Say Cheese and Die Again. This book also had a pretty interesting start to it, and even an interesting ending to it. But again, the middle is very slow. I thought that it was an interesting concept, and one that we had seen before, but again, it didn't do enough. The story essentially revolves around the protagonist's weight. You heard me right, their weight. The story starts off with a really good, scary, suspenseful moment. After Greg gives his report that he gets an F on because his teacher doesn't believe it's true, Greg goes out to find the camera to prove it. First picture that he takes is a picture of a kid named John. The picture shows John lying on the ground in pain with a nail shoved through his foot. And then sure enough, a few seconds later, John gets a nail stuck through his foot. But that and the twist are really the only truly suspenseful parts of the book. Like I said before, the middle of the book revolves around the main protagonist, Greg, getting too fat because his picture was accidentally snapped with the camera, and his friend Sherry, who ends up losing too much weight. So you get Greg, who's too fat, Sherry, who's too skinny, and this goes on for so long. It's not very interesting. It doesn't really tug at your heartstrings. It doesn't really scare you very much. It's just a simple, boring story.